In the heart of a forgotten swamp where rivers twist like serpents and the air holds secrets older than time, a shadow moves beneath the surface. It is not a crocodile or fish. It is something far more ancient. Spinosaurus, the river titan, sleeps beneath the mud and roots, waiting. When the storms return and the earth trembles again, so will he. Legends speak of a hunter who swims instead of runs, who vanishes like mist. But legends are often ignored. Until now. Because something has disturbed the waters. And the predator of rivers is ready to rise once more. The wetlands stretched far beyond what the eye could follow. Trees stood twisted with roots buried deep in black water. Birds cried from the canopy above while insects hummed in the thick, wet air. Few dared to enter the swamps. Locals said the land had memory. They whispered of shapes in the mist and eyes that watched from beneath the water. But no one had seen anything in years. Until Dr. Kale arrived. Dr. Kale Lorne was not a man of myths. He was a paleobiologist who chased facts through fossils and field notes. But something about the letter he received pulled at him like gravity. It came from a small village in North Africa where a child had found something strange, a tooth longer than a man's hand, smooth and curved like a crescent blade. The boy said he pulled it from the edge of the river after the flood. Kale knew that shape. Spinosaurus. The name echoed through his mind as he flew into the desert. He remembered the creature well, massive, with jaws longer than a crocodile's and a sail on its back like a boat turned to bone. It was the only known dinosaur that hunted in water. Most called it a mystery. Some called it myth. He called it the key to a world science had never fully understood. The village of Mersat lay at the edge of the swamp. It was not marked on any proper map. Kale stepped off the old truck with dust in his mouth and heat on his shoulders. The villagers watched him from behind cracked doors and woven shades. They did not speak much. But one boy came forward. His name was Samir. He had dark eyes and steady hands. He led Kale to the edge of the water where he had found the tooth. Kale knelt in the mud. He saw the deep grooves where something had once dragged itself toward the water. Not a human. Not a hippo. Something heavier. Something reptilian. That night, Kale opened his field kit and began to record. He logged the location and the tooth's shape. He wrote down Samir's words carefully. But as the moon rose over the water, a sound came from the trees. A low splash. Then silence. He stood up slowly. The swamp stared back. The next day, Kale hired 2 local guides to help him search the riverbank. They paddled silently through narrow channels, where trees leaned over like they were listening. He saw claw marks on a tree trunk. Deep, recent. Then they found another tooth. This one was buried beneath a fallen log, clean and wet as if just dropped. Kale knew this was no fossil site. It was a territory. He set up camp on a small rise above the water. At night, he watched the river glow faintly with algae and mist. The swamp did not sleep. He heard frogs call, birds flap, and once, just once, a great splash followed by a long ripple that rolled through the surface like a ghost beneath the water. He began to dream strange things. He saw great shapes moving through shadow. He heard deep bellows that shook the trees. In one dream, he stood in waist-high water while a towering beast with a sail on its back walked past him without a sound. Its eye turned and met his. He woke with sweat on his face. Kale was no longer chasing bones. He was being watched. Kale did not speak much during the morning. His thoughts moved too quickly, tangled in the strange dreams and the second tooth they found. He checked the samples again and again. They were not fossilized. These teeth were fresh. Sharp. That could only mean one thing: Spinosaurus was alive. He knew the world would call him mad. Dinosaurs had been gone for over 60 million years. Still, something in his gut told him this swamp was not normal. He had studied every inch of fossil evidence known. No creature matched these marks, these sounds, or these clues. It was more than belief. It was certainty. Samir guided him to a stone ridge the locals called the Sleeping Spine. It rose above the water, dotted with reeds and slick moss. Kale scanned the ground. There were deep indentations in the mud. 4 toes. Long heel marks. Some tracks entered the water. Others did not return. They were heavy, too deep for any modern animal. And they were recent. The guides refused to go any further. Kale set up his second camp alone near the ridge. He pitched his tent beside a gnarled tree, facing the river. He left out motion sensors and a camera with night vision. That night, he sat still, listening to the water flow. The wind brushed through the trees, carrying strange echoes with it. A distant growl. A rustle in the reeds. And then, stillness. The camera clicked once. Then twice. Kale rushed over. The screen showed a dark shape crossing through the frame. It was massive. Its tail dragged behind it like a log. A sail stretched above its back. The camera caught the glint of an eye. Then the shape slipped into the water without sound. His heart pounded. The next morning, he checked the bank. The tracks were there. So were long scratches in the bark of the trees. Something had come. And it was no dream. He recorded everything. He sent satellite messages to his university, but there was no signal strong enough to send large data. He was alone in the truth. Over the next days, Kale followed the river deeper. He moved through water thick with vines and insects. Once, he heard a roar that made birds scatter into the air. Another time, he saw fish jump from the surface as if fleeing from below. The swamp had changed. It was no longer quiet. The silence had turned into tension. Then he found it. A den. Hidden between 2 boulders and partly submerged in the riverbank, there was a hollow covered with mud and reeds. Bones surrounded it, large fish, turtle shells, even a crocodile skull split clean in 2. The water here smelled different. Older. And there, in the mud, were drag marks and tail grooves. Kale approached carefully. He placed a motion camera at the entrance and left. That night, thunder rolled in. Rain poured from the sky like the swamp itself was angry. Kale stayed awake, watching the footage live. Then at 2 in the morning, the screen flickered. A massive creature stepped into view. Its head was long, its snout narrow. Jaws filled with sharp teeth parted slightly as it sniffed the air. The sail on its back rose and fell with its breath. Water dripped from its scales. It looked right into the camera. Kale dropped the device. Spinosaurus. It was real. It was alive. He backed away from his tent, trembling. Not out of fear, but awe. He had come to search for fossils. Instead, he had found living prehistory. The Spinosaurus was not extinct. It had never left. It had survived in the shadow of rivers, hiding where no one dared to look. He knew he could not keep this secret. But he also knew he could not expose it. The next morning, he saw a trail of fresh mud leading away from the den. Something massive had moved during the night. He followed the tracks. They led toward the far bend in the river, deeper into uncharted swamp. He walked for hours. The air grew hot and heavy. The trees closed around him. Then he heard it. A cry. Not a roar. A call. A sound full of pain. He ran. He found the Spinosaurus half submerged in a shallow pool. Its side had been torn. A wound ran across its leg. Blood darkened the water. It struggled to rise, pushing with its long arms. Something had attacked it. Kale hid behind a tree. He watched as the beast limped forward, dragging its weight through the reeds. Its eyes scanned the land. It did not see him. But Kale saw the bite marks. They were not its own. Something else lived here. He returned to the den with heavy steps. That night, he reviewed footage again. Just before dawn, a second shape appeared, larger, without a sail, jaws longer and heavier. It had clashed with the Spinosaurus. The fight had been quick. Violent. There were two ancient predators in this swamp. The balance had broken. Kale knew he had to warn the others. But how could he explain what he had seen? He had no live transmission. Only recordings. And the swamp had already begun to shift. Rain returned daily. Water levels rose. The land seemed restless. Samir visited the camp with supplies. When Kale told him what happened, the boy listened with wide eyes. He nodded slowly and pointed to the trees. My grandfather said two monsters lived here, Samir whispered. The river hunter and the bone mouth. One ruled the water. The other the land. They fought long ago. And they fight again. Kale realized this was more than survival. It was a battle written into the bones of the earth. The Spinosaurus had not chosen to fight. It had been forced. Now, Kale had to decide what came next. He could leave and publish. Or he could stay and witness what no one else dared to believe. He looked to the swamp. To the shifting waters. To the sound of thunder rising again in the distance. He chose to stay. The swamp groaned with the weight of a rising storm. Trees shook as wind whipped through their tops. Lightning cracked the sky, and the rain fell like knives. Kale crouched behind a curtain of hanging vines near the river's edge, soaked to the bone, but his attention fixed on the clearing below. The wounded Spinosaurus limped through the flooded grasslands. Its sail quivered in the wind, and every step it took stirred the water beneath. Blood still dripped from its flank, painting the river with trails of red. But there was no hesitation in its movements. Something had awakened inside it, a need to protect its territory. And Kale saw why. Behind the Spinosaurus, hidden within a bank of fallen trees, two smaller shapes moved. They were juveniles. Not fully grown but unmistakably of the same kind. Their heads peeked from behind trunks, eyes wide. Kale's heart stopped. The Spinosaurus was not alone. It was a mother. That changed everything. The second predator, the one Kale now called Bone Mouth, was no accident. It was hunting. Not just out of instinct, but for control. The balance between the two ancient giants had cracked, and now the lives of the last remaining Spinosauruses were in danger. A roar exploded through the swamp. Kale turned to the east. The sound came again, closer. Then the trees parted. Bone Mouth emerged. Larger. Thicker. Its skull bore ridges like armor. Its skin was darker than mud and just as wet. Rows of broken teeth lined its jaws. It had no sail, just a thick spine that curved along its back. Its eyes glowed pale and lifeless. It charged. The Spinosaurus stood tall, blocking the path to her young. She roared back, louder this time, her sail rising like a battle banner. The ground shook as both beasts collided. Water sprayed in all directions as jaws snapped and claws raked. Bone Mouth bit deep into her neck, but she twisted and slammed him with her tail. The force knocked him sideways, cracking a tree in half. He got up, shook off the hit, and charged again. Kale watched with trembling hands, frozen. This was no longer about science. This was war. Raw, ancient, unstoppable. The Spinosaurus used the river to her advantage. She lured Bone Mouth into the deeper channel, where her long tail and powerful legs gave her speed. She circled, striking from the side, using the current to turn faster than her heavy opponent. But Bone Mouth was ruthless. His jaws clamped down on her sail. She screamed, the sound echoing for miles. Still, she fought. She dragged him into the deeper swamp basin, forcing him to sink further. Then, with a burst of strength, she flipped her body, using her full weight to pull him under. For a moment, the surface calmed. Then Bone Mouth broke free, bursting from the water, jaws wide. Kale shouted without thinking. No! His voice carried. The Spinosaurus heard him. And somehow, in that moment, she turned her eyes toward him. Their eyes met. Just for a heartbeat. She was not just a beast. She was a mother. A protector. A survivor. With one last surge of power, she struck forward, ramming Bone Mouth with her entire body. Her claws tore at his throat. His blood mixed with the rain. His tail thrashed once, then twice, then stopped. The river went still. The Spinosaurus emerged, heaving. Blood ran from her wounds. But she had won. Kale stood frozen in awe. The two juveniles crept from their hiding place and nuzzled against her side. She leaned into them, weak but alive. Kale backed away, heart racing. He had seen what no one else had. A living fossil. A battle for survival. A mother defending her legacy against extinction. And he had to decide what to do next. The storm passed slowly, leaving the swamp washed clean. Trees hung heavy with water. The sky glowed a dull gray as sunlight filtered through tattered clouds. Everything felt still, like the swamp had taken a deep breath and held it. Kale moved carefully through the drenched underbrush. His legs ached and his arms were scratched from thorny branches, but he did not stop. His thoughts ran wild as the image of the fight replayed in his mind. The mother Spinosaurus standing tall, roaring into the storm. The fury in her eyes. The strength in her movements. The way she shielded her young without hesitation. He reached a rise in the land, just above the clearing where the battle had happened. The swamp water still rippled faintly, stained by the traces of the fallen predator. Bone Mouth's body had sunk beneath the surface. No sign remained of the violence, except for the torn plants and broken trees that lined the bank. Kale scanned the area below. The Spinosaurus was gone. But deep tracks remained. Giant three-toed impressions led back into the swamp. Smaller ones followed beside them. She had survived. Her children had survived. Cale felt a strange wave of emotion rise in his chest. He was a scientist. He had chased dinosaurs all his life through stone and dust. But this was different. This was no fossil. No theory. No educated guess. This was life. And life had chosen to remain hidden. Back at the camp, he sat beneath the canvas top and opened his journal. His hands were still shaking. Rain had soaked the pages, but he didn't care. He began to write. Every detail. Every sound. Every movement. He wrote about the fight, the family, the eyes that met his before the final strike. He knew what this meant. If the Spinosaurus still lived, then the world still held secrets no one had imagined. Species thought lost forever might be hiding in places untouched by time. But more than that, he had seen behavior no fossil could show: maternal instinct, defense, sacrifice. These weren't monsters. They were survivors. They had a place in this world, and it wasn't for him to disturb it. Still, the question pressed against his thoughts. Should he tell anyone? If the news got out, it would change everything. Governments would come. Corporations. Hunters. Scientists. Cameras. Chaos. They would flood the swamp with helicopters and boats, trying to capture, tag, and control. The balance he had witnessed would be broken forever. He looked around the camp. The villagers were still quiet, watching from behind their shelters. Samir stood near a tree, staring at the forest. He had seen it too. He had led Cale there. Cale walked to him. "You knew, didn't you?" Samir nodded once. "My grandfather saw her many years ago. He told me the swamp held giants." No one believed him. Cale smiled softly. "I believe him now." Samir looked toward the river. "Will you tell the world?" Cale paused. His fingers closed around the journal in his hand. "No," he said. "Not yet." Samir said nothing, but his eyes shone with quiet respect. That night, Cale packed his things. He took only what he needed. He left his cameras and most of his samples buried in a metal case beneath a tree. If he ever returned, he would know where to find them. He carried only the tooth. It was enough. As the truck rumbled away from the swamp the next morning, Cale looked back. Mist still clung to the trees. The wetlands stretched in every direction, silent and undisturbed. Somewhere deep within, the Spinosaurus moved through the water, her children learning the secrets of the land she ruled. And the world moved on, unaware. Cale made a choice that day. To protect rather than expose. To respect the wild instead of conquering it. He would return to his lab, to his lectures and conferences. But he would never forget the sound of the mother's roar or the splash of her final strike. And he would never speak of it. At least not yet. Dr. Cale Lorne returned to the university in silence. His colleagues noticed the change. He had always been passionate about his work, but now there was a quiet distance in his eyes. He still gave lectures. Still led discussions. But something had shifted. He no longer spoke about what dinosaurs were. He started asking what they are. In his private office, Cale kept the tooth on his shelf inside a glass box. He had it tested quietly by a trusted technician. The results showed traces of organic matter too fresh to be fossilized. The technician asked no questions. Kale offered no answers. He spent long hours writing. Not a paper. Not a book. Something else. A log of what he had seen. Every sound, every movement, every instinct. He mapped the swamp from memory. He sketched the sail of the mother Spinosaurus. He detailed the markings on her young. He titled the file simply, The Watchers of Water. But he never published it. Instead, he began working quietly with conservation groups. He gave speeches on ecosystem preservation, on the unseen balance of life in places still untouched by civilization. He never mentioned the Spinosaurus, but his passion burned brighter than ever. People listened. Donations increased. Protected areas grew larger. He knew he couldn't save the world. But maybe, he could save a piece of it. One day, years later, Kale received a small package with no return address. Inside was a bundle of dried swamp reeds, tied in a simple cord. At the bottom, a single stone carved with 3 deep lines, like claw marks. He smiled. Somewhere, Samir was still watching. The swamp still lived. Kale never returned. He did not need to. The Spinosaurus had chosen to remain hidden. That was her power. She belonged to the water, the mist, and the silence. She had survived through time by staying unknown. And that mystery was her protection. He spent the rest of his life teaching others to respect the unseen. To know that not everything in the world must be uncovered or claimed. Some things were meant to be left wild, to be honored from afar. And in quiet moments, when the night was still and the city lights flickered low, Kale would close his eyes and remember the swamp, the heavy air, the still water, and the towering shadow that moved through it with purpose and grace. He knew she was still out there. The last of her kind. The guardian of a forgotten world.